In 2010, a 24-year-old developer in Arkansas dreamed of building a business like his hero, DHH. If he could build a web framework, he could use that to build his own SaaS and achieve financial freedom. He released it in 2011 and worked nights and weekends until a breakthrough happened. An entrepreneur discovered his project and recruited him to come work on it at his own company, Usescape. By 2014, it was growing. They even had their own conference and launched their first paid product, Forge. By 2017, he'd left Usescape and was making $1 million a year. By 2022, it was $7 million a year. By 2024, he'd reached his goal and built the most popular PHP framework in the world. He'd kind of become a version of DHH himself, someone that other entrepreneurs aspired to be. But next, he did something entirely unlike DHH. He announced that he'd raised $57 million from VCs.
Some people might see it as like, oh, you're kind of like selling out by raising money. But I see it more as like selling out if I didn't do it.
This is Taylor Otwell. He's the creator of Laravel.
At this point, Laravel, it had made many millions of dollars, bootstrapped. And I had kind of built everything that I thought I could build or I wanted to build. Forge was like the easy deployment platform for Laravel. I had built SaaS starter kits with Spark. I had built serverless deployments with Vapor, admin panels with Nova. We had just done a lot of things, plus 25 open source packages. So I only had like a few ideas left that were, I thought, really interesting, but also extremely challenging. One of which was Laravel Cloud. And the other one is Laravel Nightwatch, which we debuted at Laracon AU. Laravel Cloud, in contrast to Forge, is more like a fully managed hosting platform for Laravel. So with Forge, you have to bring your own AWS account, your own DigitalOcean account, and we provision servers on those accounts on your behalf. With Cloud, everything is fully managed. It's like a Vercel or a Heroku. And to build that, that takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of people, just staff, infrastructure staff, engineering staff, support staff, marketing staff. And I had always run Laravel. I guess there's different ways to bootstrap a company or how you want to operate it. But I had always run Laravel as lean as possible in order to maximize profit margin, basically. Expenses were really low to maximize just income. And I think a lot of bootstrappers probably operate that way because it's that's the point, right? Is to build this really nice income for yourself and have freedom and stuff. And to build things like Laravel Cloud, you can't really operate for, your own personal bottom line. It would have required basically running the company at least break even, but maybe dipping into negative, losses a little bit for the first couple of years. So, to get back to kind of circle back to the question of why do this? I felt like it was personally, some people might see it as oh, you're kind of selling out by raising money. But I see it more as selling out if I didn't do it, in a sense. And this sounds weird, but if I didn't do it, I would basically just be coasting for Laravel as a community, as a product. I was not going to build anything else super ambitious because the rest of the ideas were just too big for me to tackle bootstrapped.
Yeah.
So I saw that as a disservice really to the 13 prior years of work and people that had come along on this journey and bet on Laravel either individually or as a company or whatever, that they were going to build their business or their life around this tool. And for me to just be you know what, I'm good. My life is cushy. I'm going to go chill pretty much. And, we'll just kind of let this thing peak and sort of maybe slowly decline over time, as things do. I saw that as kind of wimpy, and something I didn't really want to do after all these years. And I'm still pretty, I'm still relatively young at 38. And
absolutely,
I felt hey, why not go big?
But wait, why is Laravel Cloud so different to all the other dev tools that Taylor built before?
Yeah, it's really kind of the risk profile, I think. And like I said, with Forge, you bring your own cloud account. So you are ultimately, you and that server provider, whether that's AWS or DigitalOcean, are ultimately responsible for those servers, like the infrastructure that runs them and things like that. So, like if DigitalOcean has an outage and your server goes down, it's not really on Forge, to like fix that. It's more like on DigitalOcean's side. Whereas on cloud, we're actually running all of this infrastructure in our own AWS sort of infrastructure, our own Kubernetes clusters, our own sort of database setup, all of that. And if something goes down, it's very much on us to like get it back up now, as well as like we're paying the bill for all of those servers to Amazon. So when our Amazon bill is millions of dollars, that it's just a bigger undertaking versus Forge, where we're not really responsible for any of this infrastructure at the end of the day. We're more just like a provisioner and like a admin tool for managing these servers, but they ultimately exist on other people's infrastructure platforms.
The Bootstrapper game and the VC game are completely different. What are the easy and hard parts of each?
The things that are easier and difficult, I think, have been relatively unrelated to the funding. So things that are easier is just I've been embracing delegation a bit more, right? So we have product managers, engineering managers, team leads. The organization has a little bit more structure to it. I wouldn't say it's like heavily bureaucratically structured, but it's a big change from where we were basically totally flat, where it was just kind of me leading the team, and then everyone else was sort of on the same level and did the same thing, because it was like all developers and one customer support person. That has actually been better overall, I would say, because you just have more help, and you don't have to keep as much stuff in your head all the time. You can lean on people to just execute really well, especially as we've tried to hire. Obviously, you want to hire really great people. I think we've been pretty successful in doing that this year, and that makes your life a lot easier as well, where if we have a really great product manager, we have a really great designer, I can just really let them execute at what they're best at. And that makes life easier for you, as a leader. Things that are harder as we've grown the company. And again, I don't really think this is like related to VC funding as much as it is just like growing a company in general. I would say growing to 50 people while being remote and while operating in a very technical product space can be challenging to get everyone up to speed in terms of what we even do here, to some extent. Like why do people even sign up for Forge? What does it do for you? What is a server? What is Nginx? What is MySQL? Those are like complicated technical concepts, and if you're coming in either on support or marketing or business operations, and you're not deeply entrenched in that world, it can be overwhelming and tough, I think, to get up to speed.
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a DevTool, at some point, your customers are going to start asking you for enterprise features. WorkOS offers you single sign-on, skim provisioning, and audit logs out the box. WorkOS is trusted by Perplexity and Vercel, as well as Workbrew, a homebrew management startup that I recently interviewed. I just told Mike that WorkOS is the sponsor, and this is what Mike said.
Yeah, so WorkOS isn't paying me any money for this. I pay WorkOS money for this, but WorkOS is like one of the best developer tools I've like ever used. It's the documentation and the experience with building with them is so good. Like I initially was almost like, okay, this seems expensive, but then I built an integration with them in about 20 minutes that I had spent 2 days bang my head off the wall trying to build it directly with Okta. And then with WorkOS, I then have like many SSO providers like supported instead of just one. So yeah, like for me, WorkOS is one of the nicest developer experiences I've encountered in the last like 5 years, probably. And it's not surprising because a bunch of the developer team are ex-GitHub and therefore very good at their job.
Go to workos.com to learn more.
The other part is just keeping everyone on the same page as a remote company. We're spread all over the world. We're in lots of different countries. We're in lots of different time zones. Getting that really tight collaboration and short feedback loops and momentum as a remote team, once you get to a certain size, I think becomes challenging, and I think that's part of the debate online, right now about like what's better, like working in the office and working remotely. And I think they both have pros and cons, but it's just one of the challenges we faced, I think, is, just all mobilizing as one unit while being spread around the globe is challenging.
Taylor is very much in the details. In the early days, he developed all of the projects himself and did all the R&D. But it feels like it would be different now.
Like pre-funding, I prototyped basically every product we have commercially. So I built Forge, I built Vapor, Spark, and Envoyer. Nova, I co-wrote. Now, I do, like, I laid some of the foundational thinking behind Cloud and Nightwatch, and definitely am very hands-on jumping in on how those products work. Cloud and Nightwatch, that being said, are the first products that I have not actually coded kind of from the ground up myself. So like we actually have, more of a full dev team, product manager, designers on staff. And I'm definitely making sure everything is on track and I have my hands in how all this stuff works. But the dev teams are really the ones like boots on the ground writing the code for these products, which is very new for Laravel and for me.
Imagine having Taylor Otwell, one of the most prolific developers in the world and literally the creator of Laravel, reviewing your code. I wonder what it would be like.
Yeah, I tend to focus a lot more. So I don't read through like every line of code or anything as much as I look at how the product works and how it feels from like a usability perspective. I'm sort of Laravel developer number 0, right? I'm like, with the most Laravel experience. And so if something feels like confusing to me, it's like a really bad sign that other Laravel developers are going to be actually very confused by this.
Yeah.
So I try to just I click through the product basically every day and just say like, what feels awkward? What doesn't quite feel smooth? What doesn't make sense? Mm-hmm. How would I do things differently? And a lot of that boils down to like either me kind of saying, hey, I think this is a little bit clunky. What if we did it this way? Or maybe me sketching out something like on paper or in Excalidraw online or something. It's like, hey, what if we did things this way? A lot of it is honestly just making sure we're sort of like on the right track and prioritizing what our feature set should be either at launch or 3 months down the road or 6 months down the road. Like what are actually the most important things that I think we should focus on? Because there's a lot of things we could do, right? And it's just a matter of kind of like keeping our scope on track, keeping our roadmap on track, and kind of making those decisions on like what we actually need to be focused on.
By the way, it's not just Forge that succeeded. Taylor has built more dev tools that made more than $1 million than anyone else that I know.
Products, I built Envoyer, I built Spark, I co-wrote Nova with a guy named David Hemphill, and I launched Vapor. All of those individually made, north of $1 million.
And Taylor still merges all the PRs in the most popular PHP framework in the world. He's a DevTools beast. One thing I noticed in the research is that he puts a huge focus on tools actually being useful.
Everything in the Laravel framework, basically, definitely all of the main features have been born out of real world work. And this is very similar to like Ruby on Rails with DHH's work extracting Rails from Basecamp. A lot of the stuff that goes into Laravel is really born out of either the core features are really born out of what we did at Userscape back in the day. We needed to build a queue system, we needed to build database migrations, we needed to improve the ORM. A lot of that early foundational work was done during that time. And then going forward from there, a lot of the work is born out by just like problems we encounter as we build things like Forge and Envoyer and Vapor. We see like the pain points in Laravel and we're like, hey, we could probably write a package to make this better. We could add a feature here to make that better. So that drives a lot of it. But these days, a lot of features are also driven just by community PRs on Laravel, the framework. So every morning I start my day on GitHub. I spend like, probably an hour to an hour and a half just going through pull requests, closing, merging. So lots of stuff gets into the framework that way as well. But I still see that as when I review a PR on GitHub, I actually do try to sniff out, is this something addressing a problem someone actually encountered, or is this sort of trying to anticipate a problem that someone thinks people might have. And I do close PRs typically if they're sort of like guessing at a problem. If they're like, hey, I think it might be useful if the framework could do this, and it's not like, hey, we had this problem at work and blah, blah, blah. And this is what we came up with to fix it. That to me holds like a lot more weight than just sort of designing features in a vacuum.
Yeah, that feels like it's something that's very like prevalent about like your mindset around it. It's like practicality and kind of like useful.
Mm-hmm. I think it sounds like, when I say it sounds kind of obvious probably, but at the time when Laravel first came out, a lot of frameworks in PHP didn't feel this way. They didn't feel like they were designed. It felt like there was groups of programmers just building tools that they thought were neat, or like were intellectually interesting to them instead of born out of like real world business building, which is what I was interested in.
Unlike most dev tools, Taylor Otwell is not in downtown San Francisco. He's in Little Rock, Arkansas, population 200,000. It seems like an amazing place to live, but it's a long way from Silicon Valley. And it made me wonder if this has helped Taylor to really build tools for the average Joe developer.
I think it has definitely helped us from chasing hype cycles or like trends to an extent. I think we always want to be, I'm always like trying to be cutting edge and not really like, I don't want to be like the old man yells at cloud meme. You know what I mean? I think that's actually really dangerous. So tools like Inertia, where we're like, we totally like React on the front end actually, and try to pair it nicely with Laravel on the back end. That's very much in contrast to Rails actually, right? Where like DHH is more like, he would more prefer to do most things in Ruby and write just a little bit of JavaScript, whereas we're a little bit more like fully embracing of React and Vue. I think it helps. I think it just helps in terms of focus, like you're not constantly distracted by the winds of change in the tech industry and things come and go, like the ways we build applications, whether it's SPAs or different ways of architecting APIs or GraphQL or different databases even, come and go very quickly in sort of that kind of like Silicon Valley space. And I don't think that's all bad, right? It's like a place where new ideas are bubbling and some of them are going to stick and be really impactful, sort of like world-changing ideas in terms of how we develop apps. And a lot of them are not. And there's no right or wrong, I think, in terms of if you want to play in that world, it's like an exciting world to play in. But we've always historically focused kind of like more down the middle, meat and potatoes, web applications. We just want developers to be productive. And while we try to embrace new tools, like, we're always open to that, we're not necessarily chasing the latest thing every few months, I think that I always try to ground everything in reality. And I think this is another thing I really admire about DHH on the Rails side is like, I would prefer to like, okay, let's say there's a new approach to doing something or there's a new technology. Let's try it and let's just see, like, does it actually make it more enjoyable to build applications? Let's actually open up our editor, write some code, give it a shot. And let's just be honest with ourselves and be like, I think there's actually something to this or there's not. And, sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. And sometimes we make the wrong calls as well. In Laravel, there's been either like patterns we sort of like adopted or promoted that sort of like fell by the wayside or like didn't serve us well or were a little too complicated or whatever. And we just kind of, I think you also just have to be honest and move on from what's not working. It's kind of another, just another aspect of kind of maintaining an open source ecosystem is being willing to change. A lot of open source tools can get sort of calcified and they don't really evolve with the the tech landscape. And that's something I've always been very afraid of. I've seen other ecosystems do it where they're like, no, like that, all that new stuff is stupid. These young devs don't know what they're talking about. Like we're going to do everything our way. And it just like the project just stagnates, over time.
One thing I always wondered is how Taylor decides what to focus on.
I mean, a lot of it's sort of like intuition and magical thinking, you just like have a sense about, you've built a lot of Laravel applications and you kind of know what's important and what's not important. I think that gets me pretty far. Where we start to need more outside feedback is when we get beyond the small, medium business range of applications and we get more into like enterprise scale applications.
Yeah.
I think that's just an area I've not historically spent a lot of time with. And so don't always have the best idea of what's important to them, either from an infrastructure or security perspective, things like that. That's where outside feedback, I think, is much more helpful. For sort of like the hobby tier, SMB tier type of customers, I think just the overall intuition of building products. And I think it's actually fine. Like, I think you don't always need empirical data for every single thing you build. I think you have to develop like a pretty good sense of knowing what people need. I tweeted something about this not too long ago where I was like, if you feel the need to like ask customers, is this good? Is this good? Is this good? Is this right? For like everything you build, to me, it's like kind of like a smell that you don't really understand the problem space yourself, like really intimately and deeply. Maybe that's just my like naive thinking, but I like to kind of operate with a certain level of like confidence in building product that like, okay, we understand this problem space very well. We know what we need to do to solve it. And we actually have these opinions on how we think the best way to solve that is. And that's the product we're going to build and ship. And we think customers are going to like it because we would like to believe that we have good taste at this company, like know how to build things. So like, I like to operate with a certain amount of confidence in that way. And like I said, that gets you so far and before you need sort of some outside feedback, but that's kind of how I prefer to operate, honestly.
While I was researching this episode, I reached out to Aaron Francis, who's a big part of the Laravel community, and asked him what questions he would ask Taylor. And he said that I should ask how Taylor develops taste.
Going back to the earliest days of Laravel, I always had these aspirations that Laravel would be this very like high taste curated framework, and it still is.
Web artisans.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds a little bit corny to me now because I've heard it for so many years, that it's like, it's kind of eye rolling.
Gives you like a warm, fuzzy feeling like I'm doing something cool today.
Yeah. I always had these aspirations that Laravel would be this very high taste curated experience. And it still is in the sense that I'm the only one that manages the PRs on the open source framework. So even, going up to this morning, I got on GitHub this morning and, kind of trimmed up the PRs. We try to keep it really low. Across the organization, I think we're at like 10 open pull requests across 30, plus repositories. So we keep that really low because I work on it every day. So it still is very curated. I think for building taste, I always tried to look like outside of development a lot for inspiration. So, in the early days, that was either through like art or music. Especially, I think I'm drawn to people that are like obsessively focused on their craft. So like things that come to mind are like that documentary, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which I've mentioned quite a few times. Just like good writing, good art, good music, people that are like super dedicated to producing really high quality stuff, like artisan type stuff, like handmade with care, and they're putting a lot of thought into it. So, like that early Braun design work from like Dieter Rams. What else? I mean, even like Jonathan Ive at Apple, right? Like big hero, have emailed Jonathan Ive. He actually responded and said thanks, which I was super pumped about. Cool. Just people that are just like really meticulous and dedicated have always been inspirations. And I've tried to let that sort of influence me to have like a high bar for how Laravel works, how it feels, but also for the code internally. I was always like obsessively focused on the code that no one sees has to actually like look good and make sense. And it can't be a big ball of mud under the hood, because I was using this framework and I feel like my sort of like obsessive personality wasn't comfortable building a business on it if I knew that like inside that vendor directory in the Laravel folder, it is like gross in there, it just spaghetti code everywhere. I just couldn't have the confidence to like build something on it like that. So anyway, yeah, a lot of stuff outside of coding, I would say, like, is how I kind of fed my inspiration for taste and craftsmanship.
Okay, so then I just had to ask a dumb question. Yeah. Did you ever write haikus?
And I never written one personally, honestly, but it sounds like kind of up my alley a little bit.
Yeah, it was like I was wondering if anyone had asked you that, because like, you know, the listeners, like Taylor's famous for these comments that are like they're kind of like haikus, right? It's like you kind of where you have reductive number of words in each line.
Most of the comments in Laravel are 3 lines, with each line being 3 characters less than the one before it. Yeah. I've had a hard time getting AI to like produce those kinds of comments. So I still have to handwrite them. But
yeah. So someone in the someone listening can build a SaaS and sell it to Taylor.
yeah, seriously. I've gotten so fast at writing those comments though, like over the years. Yeah.
It's kind of a meme that PHP developers drive Lambos, but there is some truth to it. They have this amazing community of people building businesses within the Laravel ecosystem. One of the most prominent is Jeffrey Way, who created Laracast, which is the go-to place for video tutorials on Laravel. I always wondered if it was an intentional strategy.
Not entirely, actually. So I think that Laravel has been extremely lucky to have really talented people in the community that have created some really cool things. Laracast is probably one of the number one things that have come out of the community, you know, in that regard. Jeffrey was working full-time on Laravel before I even was, because he built Laracast and he was full-time on Laracast pre-2015 when I went, you know, full-time on Laravel. So he was actually the first person I know of to like sort of start running a Laravel bootstrapped company that was making content about Laravel. And it wasn't even really Laracast and all of the other sort of like community stuff, like you mentioned, like Laravel News or various podcasts or even some of the conferences themselves were things that like when you launch an open source product or project and it starts getting popular and people come to you in the early days and they're like, hey, I want to do this. Like in my country, or I want to start this website about your tool. Your default answer is usually just yes, because you want more attention, like to come to the tool or whatever it is. And so like if someone came to me, you know, years ago and was like, hey, I want to start a news website about Laravel, like I'd be like, okay, great. Like that sounds awesome. Go do that. And I didn't really give a lot of thought at the time to like, I just never expected, you know, I wasn't looking ahead to 2024 and thinking, oh, Laravel is going to be a 50-person company and bigger. And we're going to be building these very serious like cloud platform PaaS products. So I think like it was ultimately a huge benefit, right? At like, I guess if you had to identify like a downside of that or why you might want to think about like if you're starting a DevTool open source, you never know how it's going to go. And sometimes I guess you could lose a little bit of consistency like across the ecosystem. Like there's it feels really spread out, you know, like you have Laravel.com, you have Laravel News, you have Laracast.com. And only now are we trying to sort of like make everything feel a little bit more like one family or like it's all related. But it was hugely beneficial to like the growth of Laravel, and Laravel would not be what it is, honestly, without Laracast. I think that's just like such a foundational part of how Laravel got popular within PHP is just the quality of the educational materials that Jeffrey was putting out there.
Another member of the Laravel community is Adam Wathan, the creator of Tailwind, which I use and it's great. Taylor and Adam are kind of known for playing Rocket League together.
We've been playing more Fortnite recently.
Okay, Fortnite.
Yeah, we're like a couple of 8-year-olds, I guess. But yeah, Adam and I are really good friends. I would say, you know, our relationship and friendship started out as more friends, but also collaborators on things like Laravel Valet, which we sort of built together. He was very much in the Laravel world. He comes out of the Laravel ecosystem. He was a Laravel developer at a couple agencies, full stack dev, really talented. Wrote an ebook on Laravel collections, made really, I think, the best video course on test-driven development on the internet, I would say, probably with test-driven Laravel. I think has valuable insights no matter like what framework you're using. It was just like very extensive, very practical and well done, and like honestly shaped some of my thinking on testing itself. over the years, Adam and I are less collaborators and more just like real friends, I would say, where, we talk about business, we play games, we talk about life or whatever. We don't spend as much time collaborating on code. But we definitely talk about business a lot. I would say that the things that we have in common are this very low threshold for pain, in the sense that, like, when a developer tool is hard to use, me and him both share this like repulsiveness that like kicks in at a lower bar than maybe a lot of other people, where they would just like put up with it. There's like extreme examples of this, right? Where it's like you have some startup and there's the classic, I could build this in the weekend with a Raspberry Pi in my garage and like blah, 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 blah. And we have like a very low pain tolerance of that type of thinking, where we like things to just be really smooth, to make a lot of sense, to be very intuitive, to be very high end, to be very polished. And so I think we sort of like resonate with each other on that. Adam is more perfectionist than I am, I would say. And I think he would say about himself that he holds himself in Tailwind to probably an even higher standard than I think I hold myself in Laravel, which is great, because it's like, still to this day, like I want things that I ship. I want Adam to like these things and be like, yep, this is like a good product, or this is well designed. And because I feel like if he does, it's actually pretty freaking good.
Hank Taylor, the head of marketing at Laravel, helps me to come up with this question. What's the best advice and the worst advice that you and Adam ever gave each other?
I'm trying to think if we've ever given each other, best or worst advice. I think that, I think if me or Adam has like a flaw historically, it would be that we are so perfectionist, and it can slow you down, right? Like, you just are polishing, and you always hold yourself to this extreme standard. And at some point you do actually have to ship. And obviously we've both done that over the years. But, like sometimes with him, I think over the years I've been like, yeah, you should just like, you got to ship something out. Or like, it's, he's expressed frustration of like, hey, we've been working on this for like 4 months. And it's just like, eventually you just got to ship something. I don't think we've ever given each other just like terrible advice though. We're honestly more like just friends that play Fortnite and chat business more than we are, real in the nitty gritty of each other's like collaboration efforts.
Taylor talks a lot about being a perfectionist, but he also shared that when he launched Laravel Forge in 2014, he wasn't expecting it to make much money at all. So I had to ask, how does he push himself to ship?
With Forge, I genuinely did feel that way. Like I remember talking to my wife and being like, hopefully it will pay like our house payment or our cell phone payment. And I guess like in hindsight, I should have understood that the Laravel community was pretty big. And I don't think I was thinking that back then because I thought the product wasn't good. I just genuinely didn't realize how many people were out there that would be interested in it. That's what I like greatly underestimated, was just sort of like the market size more so than like the usefulness of the tool itself. Adam and I have always laughed about this fact about me where like, I don't know if you've seen that documentary about the guy Alex Honnold that like free soloed
free solo,
El Capitan or whatever.
What
And
guy.
he just has to, it just seems like he has this like almost like mental malfunction where he's like, he doesn't have like a fear factor in his brain. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where the rest of us would just like obviously know that that's crazy. And to some extent, a lot of the products I built over the years, me and Adam laughed that there's like an Alex Honnold element to just like, of course I could build a server management platform and be responsible for 500,000 servers and 600,000 sites or whatever. And it's just like, Adam laughs because like to him, that is like, I would never ever do that. It is extremely scary. But to me, it just like, it just over the years, it just never registered really that like, of course I would like ship this. Like, why wouldn't I ship this? And like, it'll be totally fine. And, we believe in the products and they're useful. And so we're just going to put them out there. And if there's an issue, we'll figure it out, And so it's hard to answer because in some way it was like, I don't know. It's just like what I thought we should build. And what I thought we needed to build based on the problems people were having in Laravel. And there was never this question of like being afraid about it or like, being scared to do it. So I don't know. Maybe it's a bit of like just missing that kind of fear element to putting stuff out there.
Okay, so now 2 last questions for Taylor. What's his advice for DevTools founders?
I've always encouraged people to solve their own problems that they really understand. I know it's not always possible when you build software, but I think you do your best work and your most like nuanced and considered work when you're solving a problem that you deeply understand because you have it yourself. So if you're building an open source tool or you're building a dev tool, I think that's the best way. That's the best kinds of tools to build, or when you can kind of scratch your own itch.
And what DevTools is Taylor passionate about right now?
I've been playing around with our new VS Code extension that we released here at Laravel. We just did that on Monday.
Cool.
So I'm playing around with that. I'm obviously, probably like lots of other people, messing around with AI dev assistants, whether that's just using ChatGPT or using Anthropic stuff or Claude or Cursor. Really interested to see where that goes. I found it pretty useful actually for writing boilerplate code that's just kind of boring, whether that's writing tests or like, kind of generating stuff that doesn't require a lot of like really creative thinking, more just like sort of like grunt work type of activities. So playing around with a little bit of that. With Laravel Cloud, we've been spending tons of time with Kubernetes, with Docker, with Cloudflare, with different kind of database tech. On Nightwatch, we're spending a lot of time with ClickHouse. I'm not sure if you've dug into that much, but
the events and
lots of events and sort of analytics being stored in there. So we've been exploring some new stuff on our end, and it's been a fun year.
Go check out Laravel.
Of course, check out Laravel itself if you haven't tried it. Laravel.com. Give the framework a go. The docs are pretty thorough, and you have Laracast to kind of help you along. Commercially, we're working on Laravel Cloud. We want this to be the absolute best way to get started deploying Laravel products, and you can get on the waiting list for that at cloud.laravel.com. And then Nightwatch, which kind of tells you a lot of data about your Laravel app, like your slowest routes, your slowest database queries, things like that, is at nightwatch.laravel.com. We're hoping to launch Cloud in February and Nightwatch probably, first half of the year, let's say April-ish timeframe. So coming relatively soon.
So Laravel is a damn cool company, and it's a really exciting time to be there. I had to ask if Laravel are hiring.
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely always on the lookout for pretty exceptional people, and the sort of DevRel go-to-market team is one we're going to be hiring for very soon. We're kind of solidifying our 2025 hiring plans now, basically. So I think we have a careers page up on the Laravel website, so I'm sure there'll be some new stuff up there soon.
This was really fun, and I actually just rebuilt Scaling DevTools website with Laravel and Laravel Forge, so it was really cool to talk to the guy behind it. Thank you to Taylor for coming on. Thank you to Ostap for introducing me to Laravel. And thank you to Michael Greenwich for making it happen, and for WorkOS for sponsoring. Elliot and I put a lot of effort into this episode, so if you enjoyed it, please let us know and share it with your friends.